welcome back to Just Read It. Delighted to have you with us again. We're doing a book review this time on a very popular book, apparently, and that's Amor Towles, The Gentleman in Moscow. And with me today are two local writers, and I'll start with Dale here on Dale Hess. Yes, you're a blogger. Dale, go ahead and give us a bit of what's your blog's title and what do you jaw about?
Well, the blog title is The Dilettante's Dilemma, and I was just telling the group outside, the dilemma is to try to write about the things that matter the most to me rather than the things that matter the most to everybody else. That's what the dilemma is. I'm currently solving the problem of the cultural backlash. I'm only halfway through.
The cultural backlash.
So
which I'm
by tomorrow. Well,
by tomorrow.
Yeah. Pippa Norris and Ronald Englehart wrote a book called The Cultural Backlash, and then a lot of after the colon. But what they introduce is the silent revolution, the change in attitudes roughly since the 70s.
All right, I don't want you to get too deeply into that.
Which
we'll have you back for that book.
Which have been pervasive, and that is what the backlash is against.
I see. Okay.
I've never seen anybody say that before, so I appreciated it.
And so you're writing blogs on that.
I'm writing blogs on that.
Well, we'll tune into that, folks.
Absolutely.
What's the title of your blog? Again, you said
The Dilettante's Dilemma.
The Dilemma, and it'll be on our screen sometime. But what's your site address?
thedilettantesdilemma.com.
Oh, I think I could remember that. Okay.
No apostrophes, no punctuations except for the dot before the comma.
All right. Do I have to put a capital C for com?
Nope, you
All
don't.
right.
There is a com before the storm, however.
All right.
So,
Okay.
right.
I apologize. I took us off. Now, second guest is David Fuks, old friend of mine, who has burst into writing. Now, David, I know you've been slowly publishing short stories, but you have a really a nice event coming up here in November.
Yes, I was very excited to be recognized as the first prize winner for an anthology called New and Emerging Short Story Writers out of New River Press. And the short story I submitted is called Distinctions. It's about adult children of Holocaust survivors and some of the challenges that they face and that their parents face. So it's not really completely downbeat. There's plenty of humor in it, but it's an interesting angle to take. And given that that's a bit of my own life experience, I was glad to be able to write the piece.
Well, I've been following your work over years, and it's always been amazing to me how you have managed that line between this very grim subject, and yet you always find the humor of it. It's it must be, is it that the philosophy of endurance, but he always finds something funny about the situation.
Well, Holocaust survivors themselves are a very interesting group of people. The people like my dad would become very tough. I had an uncle who became very passive. So you see sort of the extremes of human nature, and the issues that bubble to the surface. If they can be very upsetting, a form of second-hand smoke, if you will. But the reality is there are also moments of great amusement if you learn how to live with them. And unfortunately, for my parents, I was a painful extrovert.
And I'll vouch for that. Well, similarly, the book we're going to discuss today, Amor Towles, Gentleman in Moscow, is a man who is able to make lemonade out of a lemon. Dale, why don't you start by giving us a little background on the book?
But he does make lemonade, but not in the way he imagined that he would. He is tied to having written a poem. He didn't actually write it. And for the revolutionary import of this poem, they would ordinarily stand him up against the wall and shoot him.
This was during the Russian Revolution, right?
During and just after. His trial was in 1922. The revolution mostly was in 1917.
That's correct.
But he's an aristocrat, and so they can't just stand him up against the wall and shoot him. So they sentence him to life imprisonment in the classiest hotel in all of Moscow, the Metropole Hotel. And when he sees that he's going to be a prisoner there for the rest of his life, he decides to become, his language, the master of particularities. Now, that's not what he does, in fact, but that's what he sets out trying to do.
All right, David, what was your take on the way this man sort of adjusted to life?
Well, it's a brilliant structure, really, that Towles put together. Here we have a single setting over a long period of time, and rather than moving a story all over the world, the world of this character is a very simple, singular place. Well, not so simple. It's a luxury hotel with all kinds of different settings, but you learn your way around this hotel as this gentleman learns his way around the hotel. And you see him develop over a period of time. I mean, the classic good novel, from my perspective, is one where you see a protagonist develop over a long period of time, and you see the development of that character, and the depth of that character grows over time.
Mm.
But in this case, it also involves the place itself. The hotel is sort of a character in
It's
and
a
of itself
universe.
in the story, and it
Certainly
becomes
Did you find
a
that?
microcosm, as it were. And it's a very interesting thing. It reminded me a little bit, oddly enough, of a Neil Simon play called Plaza Suite, which is
Yes.
nowhere as good a piece of literature as this. But what Simon did was he had three different vignettes or one-act plays in the same suite in the Plaza Hotel, and it created a sense of unity, whereas in this circumstance you had a much greater sense of unity because you had one person's story and you see him evolve in a very interesting context.
It was
Mm.
a luxurious gulag,
Yes.
but he.
Well put.
What do you think about this? I thought, picking up on your theme, David, that he did represent he had his own world, but the other thing is the outside world kept coming into him.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Didn't you? Yes. Can you talk a little bit
Well,
about
no, that when David chose that phrasing, I thought, oh, that's perfect. The world came to him. He didn't go to the world. Now, he had been almost everywhere. And there's a particular scene where he's seriously considering suicide
Mhm.
and is brought back by the acute and recognizable taste of local honey.
Yes.
And by local, I don't mean local Moscow. I mean local where he grew up. That's pretty sophisticated.
Yes, and it raises the question of what is life? What is a universe? It can be a beehive,
Mhm.
in a sense. I sort of saw the honey issue as the beehive that he was going to be stuck
Mhm,
in with all
mhm.
of these hotel room issues. David?
Well, when you think of America at an earlier stage, to a very great extent, for most people, their world was a 10-block square radius.
Mhm.
Even if you're from a big city, if you're from New York or Detroit or another big city, there's about a 10-block square that is your piece of the world. So, I mean, this made it much smaller, of course, but the circumstances of who came into this hotel, because it is the luxury hotel in Moscow, is you see American spies, you see the elite in the former Soviet Union coming. You see the bureaucracy coming home to roost in this hotel. You see all kinds
The
of different
Bolshevik
elements
who
of
wants to learn
history.
how to act like an aristocrat,
that
right? Wasn't that
wonderful?
Yeah,
wonderful?
that was really terrific. Yeah,
Oh.
that he engages the Count to become his tutor because he has to be able to interact with these international
big world,
folks,
right.
and he doesn't know how to do it. And the Count knows exactly what to do. Part of what's interesting also to me is we're seeing the growth of this aristocrat as an individual.
Yes.
And what does he end up doing? He ends up waiting tables.
Yes.
And he uses his skill in terms of how to understand how people interact with each other to be a very successful head waiter.
Mhm.
And to be able to make those relationships work and to make that system work. But that's a relatively humble job for a fellow
Who is
who
an
is
aristocrat.
But in the context of the Soviet Union, he really had made an adjustment to live
Exactly.
in the world that he was given, and at the same time, he really never gave up who he was.
Right.
But
And
he-
Dale, don't you think, oh, sorry.
He
Go make
did
it-
and he didn't. As a waiter, he knew about the wines, he knew about the soup, he knew about all these kinds of things.
Mhm.
And he chose who was going to sit at what place
And with
at
what
all
wine.
the tables.
Mhm.
So when the crucial meeting of the presidium was there, he knew who was going to be sitting next to whom because he had designed it himself.
He had controlled it.
And back home, when he was younger, they asked him to set up all the visitors around the table because it was something he was good at. And he's still good at it at the very end.
I want to ask you two a question. I'm sure you read reviews like I did, doing our homework for this program, but somebody interviewed Towles and he said, well, you wrote a book, The Age of Civility, and now what's the connection? And he said, well, there's no connection except they're both hardbacks and they both sell for blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying, there's a writer's joke because, and I'd like both of you to talk about this for a minute. He was the age of civility. He was what was left of an elegance. And he was so good-natured about it in the way he shared it and was humble. Did you feel that way, that somehow civility became the reason for being, or?
Well, it's the reason he survived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the fact is, he was a gentleman in a context where being a gentleman was no longer acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And but he retained that character and that ability to interact with people. The one thing I take Towles to task with, and I very much like this novel. I mean, his description of the Soviet history, his description of the characters, and his use of language is frequently very elegant. But here was an aristocrat in the world of Russia, Tsarist Russia, and there's a part of Tsarist Russia that deserves to be taken to task, because the reality was it was a medieval structure, while the rest of Europe had moved through the Enlightenment process. There were still serfs in Tsarist Russia until the revolution, and the people who were part of the royal family, including this individual, benefited from a level of oppression that was unacceptable. Towles never talks about that, and I think it would probably be pretty boring if he
He'd
had.
have made it
but
a
it's
history book, and yes, for
yes.
me, it would have been boring. Well, we have to close here. Can I ask a real quick response from the both of you? Because I did not get the end of the book. He finally is able to make his escape. Why does he go back to his homeland? Why doesn't he head off for America with his sort of adopted daughter? Did you make any?
Well, I don't think he could be who he is somewhere else.
Okay,
I think it was a brilliant escape. He loved being a Russian. So his escape was to arrange for the perception that he was no longer there, he was no longer in his country of origin, and he became invisible, and he got to live the life of a common person in the country with a different identity.
And after
It was-
living in a luxurious hotel, he learned how to become a common person. Isn't that wonderful? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to vote on our opinions about this book, and I bet you're just dying to know whether we liked it or not. Now, red is for just read it. That means you approve of the book. And blue is for boo. So, tell our audience, Dale, would you recommend Gentleman from Moscow?
I'd recommend it very highly. It's one of the best books I've read in the last several years. Now, I haven't read David's, so I'm going
Yeah.
to save a little space for that. But I enjoyed it. But the language, the development of character, and the marvelous, marvelous plot.
You have
So-
to, but okay, wonderful. That's,
So he gets
all
a,
right.
he gets a
David.
red one.
A good
Yeah.
character developed over a long period of time, a protagonist who's really grown, and some superb writing. So absolutely, people should buy this book.
If for nothing else, the superb writing, ladies and gentlemen, we don't see that a lot, except among ourselves.
Well, of course, yes.
Buy the book, you'll love it. And, oh, how the time goes so quickly. Thank you for joining us. Please come back and we'll have another adventure for you. Just read it. Read it. I should know the title.